morning and good afternoon, everyone who is watching our seventh Urban Dialogue. My name is Rob Rogema. I'm a distinguished professor of regenerative culture at Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico. And we are today talking about urban ecology and the impact of nature and ecology, biodiversity in cities, the relationship with people in cities, of course. And as all the time, we have again four fantastic speakers that are with us: Liat, Isra, Nico, and Rodrigo. Very much welcome to you four, and we're looking very much forward to your stories. The order is that we will have four speakers in a row, and during their presentations and talks, you can ask questions and come up with suggestions or thoughts. You can put them in the chat or in the Q&A box in your screen, so we can read them immediately, and sometimes we respond straight away. Sometimes we take a question or a suggestion to the main floor, so we can discuss it in the webinar. So that's the thing. Don't hesitate to ask questions, because that's always a great thing to make the webinar a success. We will start today with Liat Margolis. She is from the University of Toronto. She was born in Israel, and I was very much excited about to read that she was moving to Turtle Island. So that needs to be a great place to live when you're young. She is associate professor of landscape architecture at the University of Toronto, and she has been working very much in interdisciplinary ways, and she will probably talk a lot about that as well. We met, you just were talking about, we met 8 years ago together with Nico, actually, in Toronto, when we did a great design suite together on landscaping in Toronto. So very much welcome, Liat, to the webinar. And if you want to share your screen and start your talk, feel free to do so.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay, excellent. It's such a pleasure to reconnect Rob and Nico, and to meet my fellow panelists here, and share with you some of my work today. As Rob mentioned, I'm a professor in landscape architecture, the Master of Landscape Architecture program at the Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto. And today, Rob shared with us a question that he wanted us to deliberate on, how to increase biodiversity in cities. And so I wanted to share with you two stories. One that is about the Green Roof Innovation Testing Laboratory, otherwise known as Grit Lab, that I've been working on for the last 13 years. And a more recent project that I've been working on for the last 6 years, which is titled Nikabida Wadina Gigwag Indigenous Youth Program. And through this work, what I've tried to do is interweave the field of landscape architecture and the kind of competencies of design, along with green infrastructure, particularly merging all the environmental sciences and engineering, and then also social justice, and in particular, given the kind of transformations, I would say, across Canada, the kind of recognition to truth and reconciliation, and the importance of Indigenous curriculum, Indigenous leadership, and how that integrates within environmental education, environmental justice, and city building. And all along with that, I'll talk about how I've done that through a series of academic partnerships, both in interdisciplinary ways, tying together fields that are interrelated, or at least in my opinion, interrelated, as well as intercultural collaborations and partnerships, and institutionals and community-driven partnerships. So that's kind of the prelude for all this. The first story starts with 2009, where the City of Toronto adopted a green roof bylaw, which mandates the construction of green roofs above all new buildings above 2,000 square meters. And that gave a huge boost to industry, to scholarship, to research all across Canada and worldwide, in fact. To date, there are over 600 buildings or permit applications or permits that for green roofs with over 5 million square feet of green roofs that have been implemented. But really what we're talking about is even more along, like 2,000 green roofs in Toronto, because sometimes it's one building with multiple green roofs within it. Needless to say, this was a major shift in kind of thinking about the integration of living systems in city regions, and some of the motivations were obviously the kind of effects that we're seeing through climate change, with flooding, with water pollution, and in aging cities, this the need to address combined storm sewer and all the kind of related problems with that. As well as urban cooling and increase of biodiversity, given the kind of loss, massive loss in ecological communities. Along with the green roof bylaw, the policy, there are construction standards, and they're describing the kind of materiality of the green roof that is supposed to then have a kind of to address the environmental performance that the city is after, as I said, stormwater management, urban cooling, increase of biodiversity, and provision of habitat to pollinators, etc. And so these are the kinds of construction standards that are that the city had legislated. And then within that, we're talking about very low depth. We're talking about something that is 100 millimeters or 4 inches. And there's different kinds of details. I'll get to that. What's important to note is the kind of sort of target of 80% vegetative cover that one has to achieve within the first year. For us, this was in 2009, and what's important to recognize is the fact that the Toronto Green Roof bylaw really lives within a constellation of strategies and policies and environmental targets within the City of Toronto, including aspects around water management, thinking about the city as an urban forest, thinking about all the kind of natural heritage within the city, and how do we protect that, or how do we enhance that, how do we engage people in this knowledge and in stewardship, and how does biodiversity fit into all this and into all these different, let's say, green building technologies or green infrastructure more broadly. And one thing that literature points to is the fact that while we have all these environmental ambitions, there's also a performance gap between projected and actual performance, and also these gaps that are among disciplines. And what you'd find in this field, for instance, is that civil engineers will often study water, biologists will often study plant community and let's say pollinators or insects and so on and so forth. Mechanical engineers will focus on other things, the thermal aspects of green roofs as it relates to the building envelope and so on and so forth. So there is this kind of disciplinary gap. There's also a sectoral gap between all the kind of components in the building sector and in manufacturing that is not really talking to one another. And then there's a kind of a regional gap. In other words, that policies and standards tend to be sort of applied irregardless of what the microclimate or ecological zone. And what is happening is that these applications of these standards are applied whether we are in Toronto or whether we're in Mexico. And so, or, maybe not Mexico, but let's say Texas. So these kind of North American policies have begun to spread without really looking at the nuances of the local climate. So we sort of asked this question following the 2009 legislation and construction standards. Have we put the cart before the horse? How green are green roofs? Are we doing a lot of lip service? And is the performance actually justified, given that, as I always say, there's no free lunch. Everything comes with an environmental cost of materials, emissions, waste, and so on. So are we offsetting these environmental costs with the benefits that we're getting through green roofs? This was the lab that we established in 2010 following the Green Roof Bylaw, thanks to grants from municipal and federal government. We were set up a test lab with 33 test beds, instrumented with sensor technology, looking at this all the kind of environmental performance that the city is after. And what is important, I think, to note, and this has always been why I've been pursuing interdisciplinary research, is that it's really important to weigh the kind of environmental performances side by side, and looking at how do we develop a kind of a decision matrix where the environmental performances are more important, or how do we prioritize? What are the design factors, design parameters that are most significant for each one of these environmental performances, so we can see what makes sense for each site. In other words, not all green roofs are made equal, and nor should they be. And I'll get to that later on in the presentation. So this is just a shot about the kind of sensor technology. We're acquiring real-time data, and we're also doing field research, looking at calculating how many plants and what's the cover percentage and what's the biodiversity and so on and so forth. There are several aspects to the construction guideline that were really important. Some are the kind of growing media, and there's a big debate around that in the industry. The second is on the right, a sedum mix, which is the most prevalent applied in the city of Toronto, but probably also across North America. And on the left, a more biodiverse native selection of herbaceous forbs and grasses. And so those were the two sort of very debated plant communities. The other is irrigation. There is encouragement for water conservation, and we're looking at whether irrigation makes a huge difference, and we're looking at whether it's irrigated daily, whether it's not irrigated, and whether it's soil moisture sensor irrigation or on demand. The prevalent industry practices prescribe the mineral aggregate, the sedum, and either daily or no irrigation. And what we found through several years of study is that irrigation is really most significant factors for all three performances criteria, but in opposite ways. In other words, irrigation reduces water capture. So if you're after stormwater management, irrigation is really a problematic, but it increases thermal cooling, and supports biodiversity. So here's what I mean about sort of weighing your choices of what you need to do. The organic media outperform the mineral base for stormwater management, thermal cooling, and plant growth, particularly to support biodiversity. And again, this is a big debate within the industry. And then the sedum species as a top performer in both stormwater management and thermal cooling, just because it has this kind of, just because of its sort of physiological structure and resilience to very harsh conditions. So those were what we found in initial studies. But at the same time, when we're talking about biodiversity, we're talking about biodiversity of plants and their interdependence or interrelation with pollinator species and other types of a provision of animal habitat. We looked at particularly solitary wild bees. Southern Ontario has approximately 350 native wild solitary bee species. These are the non-domesticated European honeybees. And so what we have found is that the sedum species that are non-native to this area attract the non-native social honeybee, while the native solitary bees are attracted to the native herbaceous forbs and grasses. So here is a conundrum again. Sedum is a top performer for stormwater management and resilience to maintain cover. It can withstand being non-irrigated. It can withstand on being on aggregate. It is very resilient. However, what we're missing or impacting is this kind of relation to habitat of native bees. The other study that we found, is that height matters. So we're in an urban fabric. This is an aerial shot of downtown Toronto. We're talking about the new construction in Toronto is 40, 60 stories high and so on and so forth. Doesn't make sense to cover buildings at such elevation with green roofs. And what we've seen is a corollary decline in bee visitation above 8 stories. Which kind of makes sense. That's the more or less the height of a large canopy tree. And so really bee visitation to the 40th story is not really realistic. Here we have the opportunity to really think about the structure of buildings, the high rise on top of a podium building, and should we design at a lower level for biodiversity and at a higher level for thermal cooling, reflectivity, and stormwater management. So really parsing out these environmental performances relative to urban fabric. And the other thing that we found was that context matters. So the less context of ecological any sort of green spaces around, you are also less likely to have any sort of species richness and abundance. And here is a shot of downtown Toronto, where the kind of ecological spaces or green spaces are not really present. And so these questions around biodiversity and resilience are ones that I think are really important to consider. Here's the kind of biodiverse mix of native herbaceous plants and grasses that are suitable here for this climate region. But what we have found is, and this was sort of not something that we had planned, but because of the building construction in the lab where we're at, they had shut off irrigation. They shut off the water for construction for a number of years. And what happened is that all the herbaceous plants essentially perished, and the sedum started taking over. And so this notion of how do you develop for a changing urban condition, how do you develop for adaptation, knowing that urban fabrics change, We might have a disruption. We might have another building that's built next door and all of a sudden shadows our green roofs and so on and so forth. How do you build for resilience and adaptation? And what we're sort of saying, rather than looking at an either or solution, trying to really think about these kind of very resilient green roofs designs, and this could be applied for landscapes in general to accommodate drastic change. And so what we're doing right now is looking at satellite thermal and aerial imagery with building permit data since 2011 for 7 or 8 years, looking at all the construction of green roofs and to see how they're performing. I think I'm kind of over time here, but I just wanted to share some of the kind of the thoughts around empirical research, generating metrics and revealing nuances, learning by doing, interdisciplinary collaborations and transcending institutional structures, multi-sector engagement influencing learning from policy and practice, and also in the context of academic pursuits, looking at campus as living lab and merging research and teaching with campus operations, really thinking about how do we adapt the buildings that we have on campus to actually work with building operators and to actually install these green infrastructure and test them on site. Rob, how am I doing for time? Do I have 2 minutes to go through, or do you want me to stop here? You're on mute.
No, that's fine. But take another 2 minutes to finish your talk. Great.
Thank you. I'll just go through this really quickly, and we can speak about this more later. But one of the other projects that I wanted to share with you is really looking at the combination of also creating sustainability pathways and education, and really about this kind of notion of connecting to land on an individual basis. And this is a program that I co-founded with an Indigenous elder who's Anishinaabe from Northern Ontario, and is a very well-respected community leader. And we founded Nikabidawidinagigwag, an Indigenous youth program, which is an employment, mentorship, and pathway to post-secondary education in fields that are related to design and the environment. And here, what I wanted to sort of foreground is this notion of thinking about land not as a resource, but rather as identity, as a relative, as it comes from Indigenous teachings, as healer, as connection, as spirit, as being, as community, as kinship, as belonging. And this is the kind of shift that I've been working on within my own work to really think about what it means for individuals and for communities to actually be connected with plant communities, to know plants, to think about them as relatives in the same manner that we would think about our own humankind as relatives, but to have the kind of shared respect and reciprocity, understanding their gifts that plants have to give us, and not only in terms of ecosystem services, but their kind of plethora of medicinal gifts that plants have to give. And so these stem from also a process that and sort of a big process that Canada has been involved with the history of Indigenous peoples in our country, looking at truth and reconciliation. And this is a longer story, but really calling for changes in curriculum, in spaces, in hiring of faculty and staff, in supporting students, and so on. And with this project, we're really looking at merging these calls to action with the kind of sustainability mandates or targets within the University of Toronto, as well as City of Toronto. And so with the youth, we're looking at companion planting, plant phenology, the cycles of plants, plant varieties, traditional foodways, traditional agricultural techniques like clay pot irrigation, creation stories that oftentimes come with ethical lessons. We're looking at seed teachings and really understanding plants in all their botanical components, looking at seasonality and when do these plants transform, thinking about seed keeping and responsibility to keep those seeds and transfer them to next generations. Also doing foraging, thinking about plants within their communities. Where do we find them relative to topography, relative to microclimates, relative to urban environments? Daily observations and a return to that place. So there's a kind of an embedded stewardship within it, building that relationship with place. And then feasting, this kind of notion that if we're thinking about plants as in this kind of fashion of intimacy, joy, community, nourishment, at a physical level, intellectual level, emotional, spiritual, creative matter, there's a real intimate connection to identifying trees. Our youth go around in the city never looking at plants in the same way. They're all of a sudden, they're never alone. They're feeling that they have a community, and it's a plant community. So each year we plant over 750 native trees and shrubs, and we hold a community event planting. We also work with the University of Toronto and the City of Toronto to change what you might see, these kind of conventional planting along streetscapes and turning them into more biodiverse plants that also carry with them cultural teachings, medicinal properties, and so on. And always engaging with that aspect of plants that is in a very personal and experiential manner. Thinking also about integrating learning throughout campus landscapes and working with operations and working with building managers, CAOs of faculties, and so on and so forth, to really think about how do we think about landscape as a teacher. Also integrating a lot of uncommon or at-risk species, convincing sort of grounds manager that we could actually support them and support species selection that is beyond the kind of the conventional species selection in urban regions, and really thinking about multi-strata planting, not just the canopy and the lawn, but really thinking about what the really missing layer of this understory shrub layer and ground cover, and thinking about what that means again for habitat and the human relations. So leave you with this statement in terms of thinking about the kind of shift that I've been making in my work for thinking from more a kind of a transition from eco-services to thinking about gifts and thinking about plants as gifts or land as a gifter, and this kind of responsibility, and from moving from a kind of a techno-political change to a change in worldview. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Leah. It's exciting to see what you have been doing, and also the last bit where you're talking about the transition you made from. I made a note of this. It's from the technical, political kind of, the way we do things when we work in a university or work for a government, towards a more emotional side of things and more connecting to what is around us and value that in a very great way. Thank you so much for your talk. I have a feeling that we could do another one with you on the last project specifically. So we might need to extend the story and give that more time, because I think there's a lot to learn from that project and the collaboration that you have with the indigenous people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We move forward to our second speaker, which is Nico Tilley. He is working at the Delft University of Technology, leading there the Urban Ecology and Ecocities Lab, which has produced over the years some remarkable research outputs and work from the students, but also of himself, of course. He's working for a long time on nature-based solutions. He is also a botanist, so it's not only that we design the things, but he also knows what he's talking about when it comes to plants and trees. What else can I say about Nico? He has done remarkable work in different places, not only in the University of Delft, but all around the world. Has worked for the municipality of Rotterdam for quite a long time. And he was, last but not least, the chairman of the Ecocities World Summit last year in Rotterdam. So Nico, very much welcome to you as well. And please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rob, for inviting me, and thank you to be in this nice panel with some nice colleagues I've met either online or in real life. So that's really nice. Okay, let me continue with this. So basically, yeah, urban ecology design. I work at the Faculty of Architecture at a technical university, and at the beginning, people thought urban ecology. What's that doing over here? You know, we don't work with plants too much and biodiversity, but that has changed a lot. And I was looking for a way to deal with this and how to start design with this. So I started to at the basis basically, yeah. So what is urban ecology? Yeah. So the whole of interactions of organisms, the built structures or the non-living environment basically, and the physical environment where people are concentrated. So let's say what we see in nature, like natural successions and things like that, they are always disrupted. And this is an image on the Dakakker, the roof acre of a building in Rotterdam. And basically, a biologist would explain urban ecology like, okay, we have this sunflower, we have an insect who goes to the sunflower, and this insect is eaten by a bird. And then this bird gets eaten by a peregrine falcon. So it's a food web, a food chain of what's happening and how nutrient flows into the system of composers and decomposers, gradients, etc. But it's only since recently that, you know, this edge of the building, this concrete edge, you know, this was designed and built in the 50s. But to make this edge bioreceptive so that plants can grow on, that bees can go in, maybe birds and bats, that's something, yeah, quite recently, actually. It's not that long ago. So we need to put more effort in designing for that when we build new buildings, let alone if we look at the structure of the buildings in the whole of our city, well, to design basically for urban valleys, for flows of air, and basically the movement of biodiversity. So there's a whole new context from the spatial and the designing disciplines added to the biological view of urban ecology. And when I talked to my students and we gave some courses, I think this is a course we did with Rob together a few years ago, then this student said, okay, if this is my campus, then the bird life said, okay, there's 4 types of birds, basically the water birds, the birds who like in grassland, the birds who like shrubs and woodland, and the birds who like rocky areas. And then basically the student drew the campus, or you can also do this for a city, in what I call a biotope or a habitat map. So this is the campus in those 4 types of habitats. And campus has always been one of our main working areas or fields where we test things. So this is everywhere we have an eco-campus group where we do a lot of projects. But still, you know, that's at project level. So the next question we ask ourselves, how can we actually design with this? How can we make, well, basically urban ecology design? So the approach was basically to look at, okay, what do we start with? We have the natural layer, or in the case of the Netherlands, we don't have that much nature left. So it's the agricultural layer, natural and agricultural layer. But of course, water, soil, the elevation of the land, and the existing vegetation is, of course, what is very accurate and what we would like to know. And on top of that, yeah, cities have been built. New neighborhoods from the 50s, neighborhoods from before the Second World War, neighborhoods from 10 years ago. And each neighborhood has its own green structure, its own water structure with different requirements. So that means that some green structures and tree systems are very old. And to each system, each neighborhood has its own specific species. So let's say all the neighborhoods from the 2010s or the 1930s in each city in the Netherlands have similar species, kind of. There's a little difference between the higher ground in the Netherlands and the lower grounds, but still, so we can make target species for every different type of neighborhood or neighborhood typology, which we did here. And this is done by the city of Rotterdam. So we can use that in our design process. But be aware, it's of course, there's a quality to nature, intrinsic quality, but be aware that greening the city is not just for the birds and the bees. There's obviously also a lot of benefits to people, linked to urban vulnerability, or urban resilience, or nature-based solutions, you name it. There's many papers and publications about the link between nature and greening cities and the benefits for people. As one of our students has shown here, how greening the city helps the aesthetics, the well-being, water harvesting, air filtering, recreation, you name it. I've put in an image here of the ecosystem services. So that's all linked to each other. So biodiversity is not just about going extinct of the polar bear or the panda bear. No, biodiversity also means that the worms in the soil or other creatures in the soil, they have a function. And as long as we take out too many of these little creatures, the soil will not be very open. So water cannot penetrate. So it cannot store water. So water storage, we can take that out. So basically it's a little tower block. And if we take out enough little blocks, then it collapses. And we don't want that. And so biodiversity is the key to our local urban ecosystems. So how to design with that? What are some design steps? Well, if we look at system level, we like to intervene in flows. So this is, for instance, a city built in a landscape, and that has changed the water flows in this landscape. It has changed the nutrient flows. So the question is, where do we need to tweak the buttons to in this system to basically create conditions for the habitats? Because if we make it less wet, then different habitats will emerge than if we make it more wet or allow it to be more wet. Sometimes we have an influence that, sometimes not, of course. So step one is look at systems level. Can we make a design there? Step two is actually, can we actively create habitats? So instead of creating the conditions, can we make it happen? For instance, here where we create a floating islands for water birds, or we make a bee garden, and all some other examples, which basically creates conditions for species in itself. So this is step two, habitat creation. And step three is basically, can we actively help species by, for instance, adding nest boxes or bird boxes or bed boxes, or you name it, or beehives, or bee burrows, because beehives might only be for the honeybee, and things like that, like we did here. So all in all, if we put that together, you can say that urban ecology design approach can be done on three levels: at process level, habitat level, and species level. And you can also link that directly to people, because habitat is place and species is, of course, human beings. So we are working on this to make this more concrete and to make this happen. So some examples on systems level is, for instance, this vision of the city of Rotterdam many years ago is to solve the water issue from torrential rainfall, how to store the water, for instance, in a sponge city and a canal city, and then link that to water squares. Maybe that should have been water parks right now. And for instance, a water square like that, so it's changing something at systems level, can lead to an intervention locally like this, where basically more water is stored. And if you link this to the park system, you see that you can create wet and dry zones, and it has an impact at species level, but it also creates a good public space in this case. So the link to create this and to do this actually also means that you have to provide good quality spaces for people, because urban ecology is also about people. Then the habitat creation, well, maybe a little bit of theory. The iron theory is behind this, better or worse. Top left, that a bigger green system is, of course, better than a small one. A bigger one is better than 4 small ones. Connect is better, and you can see the graph there. And we talk about core areas, corridors, stepping stones, buffer zones. That's all quite familiar. But how to translate this into the system. And so we did this for Delft University. So there was this ecological vision. And we had some target species. We worked with ecologists and said, okay, what species, if we can change stuff, what can we bring extra to campus? And well, one of the things was this, of course, we looked at system level. Can we do something with the water system? Basically, that was what the ecological vision was based on. But also it's about, in this case, soft edging of canals. Simple things where hard edges, the ducks and the frogs cannot go out of the water, but also gradient creation, basically. Or here, where a lot of sand has been used in an urban system on top of the original system, but what do? You can still use native plant species, but then from sandy soils, like this dune landscape planting, which basically is near the Bouwpub, near where the students drink their beers, but still it has a link to this and some explanation what is happening in this place. Another example is this urban bocage. We also did a project about a linear forest in a city, where we try to use young trees, old trees from different species and different levels, so that if one species would die or would be in difficulties, that at least the green structure is still there. Here in the urban bocage, it's like introducing an urban hedge landscape. And so here we plant some trees, and this we first cleared it, and then we said, okay, let's do 25 meters of local vegetation. So that's local Dutch shrubs and some undergrowth, and see what kind of bees and insects and other animals and in the food web it attracts. And then for the next part, we did actually 25 meters of vegetation from Bordeaux in France. And I mean, many people thought from Bordeaux in France. Yes, and the reason because of that is that that is actually the climate we are expecting in a few decades. Actually, it's already happening now. So maybe it's already in 10, 15, 20 years that it will become more hot. We see already more hot summers. So we already are testing what type of urban vegetation we can adapt and put in some of these hedgerows, because some of the local stuff is actually disappearing bit by bit. So here we test the soil, we do measurements, and we use different species now from that area in France, which we also expect will migrate north. Another project we did is this link to the bee landscape. Building bee burrows, but the bee burrow it's one spot. So the question was, how can we use the bee burrow as a kind of linear landscape element? So that, for instance, if we create we have the verge of a street, that we make a wadi, so let's say an inundation over the whole length of the street, but at the same time use the soil which comes out for this ground bees, which is so that we have elongated bee ridges and not just the bee burrow. So like here on the drawing on the bottom right, so that we have more linear landscape elements. And even it doesn't have to be for bees only. It can also be for swifts or for other birds like kingfishers, if it's near water, which use these steep edges of soil for nesting, actually. Then another project we did is from this habitat creation is on campus, in front of a building of architecture. You see the trees, some of them maybe behind the bikes, they are in pots. and they need to go into the soil. The tree arboretum, we done measuring stuff, and then we said, okay, let's combine things. Let's basically, it's not only for urban heat, but let's combine urban heat islands and water storage. So a wadi full with trees which can withstand the water when it rains every now and then. So we called it urban climate growth, or, and just easier to say, a tree wadi. And here, for instance, the planting you see here is actually what is the cooling capacity per tree, per different tree, and where shall we plant it, because that's the hottest area we measured. So here you see what we measured, how heat it is, what is the temperature, how hot it is, and then what type of tree to plant there. But we also wanted to have water from the roof of the building to infiltrate. So here water from the roof is collected and basically goes through the soil to the wadi where the trees are planted. Many trees cannot deal with water clogging. So the dry loving trees we took out, we put somewhere else, but some can deal with it. So the ones who can easily deal with it, we put in the deepest areas. The ones who can deal less with it, a bit higher, and the ones, we have a few ones which still don't like it, so we put them on the highest ground. So, which means that basically the forest floor is kind of, has different levels. So here we have this little forest in front of our faculty of architecture, where we test many trees and undergrowth, and this will be built in a few months, and we are looking forward, well, to make this happen, to combine basically climate adaptation measures with water and heat stress, to improve biodiversity and to do soil tests, but also to create again a nice place for students and staff. So to have this third step, I already mentioned systems level, habitat level, and species level. And at species level, and it's the same with human beings, we like safety, food, reproduction, variation, and connection. And it's the same with a bird, for instance. A bird, it needs safety. So if a bird needs safety, for instance, you can plant a hedge with thorns so that the fox cannot get to it. Food, it needs a hedge with berries. And if the berries are not there in winter, it needs other stuff, maybe seeds in summer. It needs nesting, so reproduction places. It needs variation, differences in food supply, but it also needs connection to link to other birds of its own to reproduce, to have a viable DNA variation. That's also biodiversity. Biodiversity is the diversity of species, habitats, and the genotypic background. So this is what the student did, looking at different species of birds. Maybe some similar examples, but that's nice about biodiversity. Every species has its own requirements. So it's nice to map that for your local species and then translate that, in this case, to a building envelope. And you can do the same for plants, vegetation, trees for birds, trees for bees and butterflies, plants and full shade or full sun and half shade, and work with that. So there's also different websites. Of course, they differ per country, but this is the one in the Netherlands, where there's a checklist for green building, what you can do at species level. And then kind of as a building block to habitat and systems level. So I'm almost finished. Some extra notions and synergies. That is, well, we have these challenges worldwide. We have the biodiversity, climate change issues, and the question is, are these building typologies that, in some cases, they're quite good, and in other cases, they are quite bad. So, but are these the building typologies which answer to our challenges? Or are these some answers? Or are these only fairy tales? Well, some are really fairy tales. But still, if we look what's being built now in some places, like this is a gymnasium school in Paris with bioreceptive concrete. Outside, we see 3 wadis actually already. with green roofs, with holes for bees, etc. So can we take this a step further from building level to city level? And that's my main question. And my last slide is basically, well, to create nice, good quality places is key for the bigger public. If we sell all these projects, which we see in the picture here in Rotterdam, if we would have sold them like they are good for ecology, environment, they would not have happened. But they were sold like, okay, it's a nice place to relax, to sit, to walk, and to enjoy nature. And then people got very enthusiastic. And of course, it needs to clean the water, and it's good for biodiversity and to store water. That's what we need to do. So it's a very interesting co-creation what is happening here. And well, with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nico, so much for your story. I think you have 30 more projects you could talk about and illustrating your philosophy, and I think that's fantastic. I want to pick two things out of it, and one is the connection between the scales that you mention all the time, between the system, habitat level, and species level. That is, you cannot do the one level and forget about the other two. You need to continuously, I would say, connect those levels with each other. And the other thing I found very interesting is, let's say, the anticipation for future climates. So anticipating already on something that is going to happen in maybe 5, 10, or 20 years. So that is, I think, for many planners and policymakers, something that we forget about easily, because we tend to think that nothing will change and we just replicate what we already have. So I think those two elements, I think, very important out of your talk, which contains a lot of more very interesting stuff and material that everyone would like. I would also ask people that are watching at the moment, don't hesitate to put a question or some thoughts that you have into the chat, so we can also get some feedback from you, what you think about what we're talking about. It's time to move on to our third speaker, and this is Isra Mahmoud. She is working at the Politecnico di Milano. Did a lot of work on nature-based solutions, but not only focusing on biodiversity itself, but also on the relationship between biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and governance and inclusion, and how that would pan out. Last year she led a very interesting conference. I had the honor to be part of that, on nature-based solutions for sustainable urban planning and design. So that's very interesting. Welcome, Isra. Very nice seeing you again. And I would say share your screen and your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, for this presentation. I would try to see. So you're seeing my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, whatever your time zone is. I would like first to thank actually Rob for inviting me for this. And as he said, my focus is going to be on nature-based solutions. And then I'm going to thank actually Nico and Liet, because they paved the way with the word on co-creation without they knowing that my presentation would focus on the co-creation of nature-based solutions and how do we do for urban planning. So basically my presentation today is going to look on how did we implement nature-based solutions in a project called Clever Cities. And without further ado, so just briefly, the project that Rob was mentioning, so nature-based solutions for sustainable urban planning, we talked about greening cities and shaping cities, how these possible solutions could change the morphology of the cities, and how can we plan to eventually have people on board of the implementation of different planning and different nature parts of the city. So I'm now an assistant professor in the Department of Architecture and Urban Study of Politecnico di Milano. I have been working here for the last 6 years. I have been leading the Clever Cities project, and before that I have been also working on different projects related to nature and greenways in Boston, United States. and also now in Italy. Without further ado, let's move to the presentation of today. So the Clever Cities project is a project that looked at how can we implement nature-based solutions with communities and how can we do that. My presentation is going to look at three different parts. What is happened, how did we shape this process, and what is the Clever Cities experience, and what did we learn from this experience, as well as the different examples of what we call the Clever Action Labs within the different cities, front-runner cities, and what's next for us in research. So in the first part, this is what is Clever Cities about. We designed locally tailored ecological solutions for value-added urban regeneration. And when we started doing that, we started with Hamburg, London, and Milan as a front-runners to make nature-based solutions in the interventions where key districts that we're looking at, how can we do that through inclusive collaboration, multidisciplinary approach, and socially inclusive. The project also was the part that we developed was a guidance for co-creation of nature-based solutions within cities. So there was the first part that was merely theoretical, looking at what is the co-creation definition, how can we do that within an urban innovation partnership, what are the different possibilities to co-design, co-implement, and co-monitor and develop the nature-based solutions within different municipalities as well as with the community. And let's say the practical part of the guidance was on defining on a pathway that was divided in 16 steps, and these steps were also developed in a way that municipalities and city leaders could also use them flexibly and to readapt them in some context. So the guidance in this phase was still theoretical, and there was just an idea how to develop these solutions. You can see that it's divided in different phases. So we have co-design, implementation, and so on. The guidance was then translated in many languages, Italian, Serbian, and also it was written in English, but it was also translated to some parts in other languages, and it was really a success as an initial part of the Clever Cities. But then we started understanding that we needed to develop this co-creation guidance as well. It was a process that was developed within the time. So we started linking between the different phases, SDGs, assessing how the different cities could also connect to their targets, and how can we convince the municipalities and the different part of the decision makers to be on board of this process. So this was part of the work that we developed. We also had a part related to the measuring of nature-based solutions benefits and co-benefits related to social cohesion, environment, human well-being, and economic prosperity. But I will come back to this model and show you what are the results after that. Afterwards, we started with looking at the front-runner cities, what happened with the Hamburg, London, and Milan. In Hamburg, very quickly, so the nature-based solutions were placed along a corridor, and the Clever corridor in Hamburg, we're looking at different types of interventions. So they had green roofs, facades. They also had a schoolyard where they started implementing nature-based solutions with the different parts of the community, refugee camps, and a church. And also within the school, they also had an aquaponics system, and so on. So these were types of the solutions that they were intervened in Hamburg. In London, actually, their urban living labs, or what we call the Clever Action Labs, they were in Thamesmead, so it's the south of London, southeast of London, where they started intervening on nature-based solutions in a bigger scale. So they were doing different interventions related to how to connect people and places and nature and so on. And they started by putting these interventions as well related to their challenges that they had in the area. So how is this related to child obesity, low income rates? How do they do the co-design with the residents and so on? So they started working by also different activities related to the lake that they had, and how can this bring the community and closer to the elements of nature as well as the students from the community. And then in Milan, we had 3 different types of interventions as well. So we started, one of them is Cal 1, which is regreening Milano. It was mainly looking at green roofs and walls and the implementation of that. The second one was related to a park, community park, and I'll show you pictures of the situation now, and how can we bring people to take part of this process. And the third one was train stop, and that was already finished, and I'll also show you pictures. So the one of regreening Milano was started with a public bid for green roofs and walls by the municipality, and there was different activities related to raising awareness about how can we bring people closer to nature, and how can we make them work with nature within our process. In CAL 2, we started working with the park, with the citizens, and we implemented what we call co-design by immersion, which is a technique of co-creation that we bring people to the park and we ask them what do they want to feel and hear and see with the nature that is surrounding by the park. And from this activity, we actually came up with very good results. A little bit in detail. So one of the green roofs that was implemented, we started by doing the different kind of analysis and what we call co-design value proposition with the municipality and the Agency of Transportation in Milan. We started doing this by the people that use the space, and which means that the people that work within the space of the building. And we started implementing this green wall. So this was the pre, as you can see here on the left of your screen. This is the pre of the situation, and this is the actual green wall that we have implemented. It was in 2022. We have also started monitoring a little bit what are the different kind of positive and negative experience of this co-creation within. So we started seeing as well acts of vandalism. Of some people wanted to also to take part of this wall, so they started taking some of the small plants that was on the wall. This is actually the actual wall, so you can see that it's a huge space of 350 meters square within the heart of one of the deprived neighborhood within the south of Milan. Some other experiences from also the CAL of green roofs. So we have also 4 terraces on social housing, and in this experience we are also talking about age ranges that have higher than the ones that we expected. So it's also involving people from different experiences. In the CAL 2, which is Giambellino, which is a neighborhood park, it was designed as an area that has different parts of nature-based solutions. So we have bird gardens, we have different orchards. I have left it in Italian because it was done by the municipality and I want to keep their credits. So I want to thank as well people from the municipality that they wanted to participate in this. The idea that was this park had different pathways that would bring people within the habitat and the biodiversity of the area, because this park is connected to the green corridors of Milan, one of the parts of the green corridors of the city. So it's also had some areas with the flowers and some raised gardens that it's also related different types. So we have 250 trees and 500 different shrubs. So it's also a high area with high biodiversity rate. From this as well, we have different orchards, we have different parts of fruit gardens. So it's also looking at how the municipality. In this project of Giambellino, we have focused on doing what we call co-design in 5 steps. So we use different instruments and tools from the guidance that we established from the beginning. It was translated into Italian. And then we use these different steps to bring the experience as well to the citizens. So when we use the co-design by immersion, you can see here what we tried to do with the citizens. And then we started mapping the different positive and negative experiences as well. The project was revised. We also looked at the biodiversity of the area. So we wanted to bring children to know more about the different types of birds and different types of butterflies that are in the area. So we did some kind of activities to raise the awareness as well on this. The park in its moment now, this is what you see is the part that was structured. It's already in progress. The park will be open in January 2024. So it's a success experience for the city of Milan for this. And it's also a huge park, which is within the heart of the municipality. The third and the last example from Milan is the Tibaldi train stop, and the Tibaldi train stop was already open for public. It has different types of nature-based solutions. So we have NBS green noise barriers, green walls, and also different public spaces. This is the station that was the state of the affairs. It's already open. You can see the green walls. They are on the 4 edges of the station. We also have a nice area that is looking at the small park. We call it the Oasis, that is next to the station. The success of this example, it's that we have what we call a cooperation agreement between the municipality and different Rete Ferrovia Italiana, that is a private partner, and the Bocconi University, that is working on the maintenance of this process. So it's actually working within the students, people that live in the area, to keep this under maintenance. So these are the different pictures where you can also see how the green walls are around this. I want to then wrap up with the experience of what did we learn. The work with the co-creation process was long. It was a lengthy process. We started in 2018 and the project finished in September 2023. So learning across the different phases of the project was not an easy experience, but we started by then establishing what we have called the social monitoring methodology. We started by the pre-greening phase. So along the time from 2019 till 2021, we have collected data. We have established different phases within the methodology. So as you can see here, we looked at specifically outcomes from the process that are looking at increasing biodiversity, increasing of citizen engagement and awareness about nature-based solutions, and so on. Throughout this process, we have done different iterations. So we developed these different theoretical models, and that was also looking at different challenges that we had. So we have relationship with nature, use of space, perceived ownership, place satisfaction, and so on. So we have different categories for this analysis, and citizens' perception related to social or to security of these places as well, connection to nature. So we have run these questionnaires. We have had a sample of 330 almost questionnaires. And from this analysis, we have came with, if you can remember this model that was looking at the different benefits of nature-based solutions, we came to this model, which is the results of how this development of, how did we look at our different regeneration challenges, and how can we what do we need to work on to improve from the results of the analysis. So for instance, we figured out that the proximity to the public spaces, the relationship with the neighborhood is one of the most important aspects. And then increasing biodiversity came as a part of the outcomes of the process and not within, as a co-benefit, not as part of the process itself. So when we wanted then to measure how this, what do we want to convey as the Clever Cities at the end of its lifetime? So we wanted to add what we call a co-creation process indicator. So we started looking at how can this methodology be developed again and again. I'm just gonna run very quickly through this. So we have, in the beginning, we had a linear process of co-creation, and then it was developed, it was not linear anymore. That is also part of the learning, that the process of co-creation is learning by doing. So it's a complete process where we need to learn more about the shared governance mechanisms, the flexibility in timelines. We had a lot of delays because of COVID and so on, and also learn more about the co-design with stakeholders. We started this as the methodology as a way to operate the structure of co-creation, but then from the experience, we learned that in the practice, the complexity of this pathway, you need to work more with the different parts of your stakeholder. You need to focus on how this stakeholder engagement happens in different scales and in different types of actors. And after that, we looked at how can we monitor that. So it's an ongoing process of doing questionnaires, surveys, looking at interviews, and so on. And after this, what's next? So Clever Cities project ended. And what we have worked on is to support how can we diffuse more about nature-based solutions, and how can we learn in urban planning. We looked at possible ways to improve shared governance. That's actually my work. The complete co-creation, what do we do? And finally, what could be the possible drivers and actions to bring people to learn more about nature-based solutions? And this was the last results from this research that I was carrying with Eugenio Morello, that is also part of this research project. And with that, I thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you, Israel. What a great way to talk about co-creation and co-governance related to this important topic. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, I found striking, that you discovered that the linear process that you were expecting sort of turned out to be a non-linear one, a very iterative type of process. So that would be probably something that you would tell people, other people that are starting these kind of processes, to take into account, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Do you want me to answer now? I could also answer at the end of the presentations.
Yes, no, feel free to just respond a little bit to this.
I think it's striking to me that when we started this in 2018, it was a little bit top-down process. So we had the municipality and funding of European project to ask us to establish this pathway. So we immediately thought about a linear process where all the cities across the clever London, Hamburg, and Milan will do equally. We had similarities within the processes, but then within the implementation, it was easy to notice that not all the linear process went the same way. Some delays happened because of COVID in 2020, but some other changes related to, the structures of the municipalities, how the different implementation techniques of co-creation happens. So we started by changing this pathway, and at the end of the project, we had this one that you have seen is a little bit like a serpent one. That is actually due because the different phases, what we establish as a phases, they need to overlap. We didn't have a linear timeline within the implementation. So the co-design overlaps a little bit with the planning, the design then overlaps a little bit with the implementation, and the monitoring then at the moment that we are carrying out with citizens is overlapping again with the upscaling of these kind of solutions within the city. So it's all the process that is a process of learning, and it's learning by doing. We didn't know how can we yield some results from this co-creation pathway. My next project now is actually co-creation for urban biodiversity. So Liat mentioned that, and I'm really happy that she's working on some similarities. It's really interesting to see that there's a lot of talk about what can we bring to the cities on the terms of biodiversity, but how can we do that with citizens, and how can we bring people on board of these processes, and not just to be a receiver for the value of nature, but also to be a giver for the nature in the process. I also see another question in chat, but I don't know if you want me to keep going or keep it afterwards.
Maybe we do that after the last speaker. Thank you so much, Isa, for your contribution to the webinar. It's great.
Thank you.
Yes, we move to our final speaker at the moment, which is Rodrigo Pantojo, and being one of my colleagues within the School of Architecture, Arts and Design in Tecnológico de Monterrey. I was always very interested in his work when I see some of his work posted online, and it's also what you see in the background. He will talk about it during his presentation a bit more. He is an architect, but also very much interested in arts and design, and has different experiences all over the world. Also in the Netherlands, I saw. So there are some links with Rotterdam and other places in the city or in the country. Without further ado, Rodrigo, I want to give you the floor and share your presentation and thoughts with us, please. Thank you so much. Rodrigo, you're on mute still, so you need to...
Yeah, I'm sorry. Rob, thank you so much for the invitation. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see and hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for the invite and congratulations to my colleagues for a very stimulating presentations. Well, I want to start with a provocation. Should urban ecology be approached in a much broader way? And the reason is because Mexico is a very large territory. It's almost 2 million kilometers in size. It has 32 states and more than 2,000 municipalities, which 249 live in extreme poverty. So there are more than 180,000 rural villages and only 4,000 urban settings. However, about 80% of the Mexican population live in cities. But there is a high contrast. So the Human Development Index, we have municipalities in Benito Juárez and Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico City that have the quality of life of places like the UK, or San Pedro Garza that has the quality of life of Switzerland. And then the other hand, we have places in Chihuahua, Guerrero, and Oaxaca that have the quality of life of Liberia, Mali, and Mozambique, and Yemen. Some of the states have a high contrast as well. It's almost like Europe versus Africa. So we have places like Mexico City that has the HDI of Andorra, and Michoacan, places like Suriname. Therefore, some of the most violent states have the lowest Human Development Index, like my home state, Michoacan. So some of the most violent states are Guanajuato, State of Mexico, Michoacan, Baja California, and Chihuahua. And the reason I mention this is because 90% of my professional work and academic teaching has been in this region. So I've been working in a lot of the rural settings, and I think they should not be ignored or minimized, and I think they're equally as important as urban areas. Given this context, urban ecology should be discussed in a much broader way than just city and nature. Paying attention to rural settings could help decrease urban challenges, because rural and urban should be considered as a system and not separate elements. When talking about urban ecology, we should be thinking of a holistic approach. It should be very explicit, because a lot of times you say, oh, it's implied that there's a cross-cutting theme across social, economic, and environmental dimensions. But for systemic challenges, we need systemic responses. So it's very challenging to discuss about heat islands, energy transition, or soil restoration when people live in environments of scarcity. So ideally, one action has multiple benefits. And then how can we contribute to biodiversity through projects? Well, something we use in academia and my professional practice is we think of elements and systems. Normally in our thesis studio, we talk about water, vegetation, and soil, and on energy, but I'm not going to talk about this right now. Because the idea of systems is that we utilize these elements that become a strategy in a larger system. And then the question is how we go from elements to systems, or how do systems contribute to the restoration of the ecology? Well, a lot of times we think of these ecosystemic services. And I can give an example. For instance, whenever we talk about vegetation by itself, it can be used pure gardening and it's purely ornamental. But whenever we think of vegetation as in a larger system, it can have ecological services. So having that holistic approach, it can be just so much better. So something we do in our classes, we let students to identify these different species. So they have to go and collect the different plants and shrubs and trees. And then once they identify, then obviously they think of a palette that they have to propose. But the idea is that they can go into a larger idea, because the idea is that they use this strategically. So for instance, whenever they select vegetation, they can know what kind of vegetation they will use for wetlands, or to mitigate odor, or plants that are low maintenance, or plants that are necessary for a urban garden, or which ones relate to or attract wildlife. So for instance, this proposal made by two pretty brilliant students, they see the relationship between plants and fauna in a much in a larger scale. Is not as an aesthetic thing, but they see how this system provides ecosystemic services. And then once they select these different vegetation, they know what they can use for wetlands, for mesostratum, or even for xerophilic gardens. So for instance, in the wetlands, they know that they can restore the water. In the mesostratum, they provide life for habitat for wildlife. And these xerophilic gardens, they can filtrate water and reduce the heat island effect. Another element is soil. So whenever we talk about Mexico, we talk about these different climates. So Mexico is a fifth most diverse country. It has different 7 climatic zones with different types of soil, temperatures, precipitation, and atmospheric pressure. So if we do like a schematic section code, then we can understand the different altitudes of the different cities. And then we can understand that the acidity and alkalinity of the soil, then it creates different environments. So basically these minerals that are in the soil detect different flora. And then that way the students understand that the vegetation we have in Puerto Vallarta or near the ocean is very different from like Toluca, that is like really high. And that's how then they can understand that the vegetation we have in the Bajío is very acid. So we will have like Joshua trees, cacti, or mesquites. But if we go high in the mountains, like somewhere in near the state of Mexico, then we will have ash trees, oaks, and pines. Another element is water. So we tell our students that they have to understand the water source, you know, so it's not the same, the storm water, the superficial water, or the underground water. And they also have to understand the types of water or the water quality parameters. So it's not the same, the clean water, the gray water, or the black water. And the idea is that they really understand this. So whenever they think of systems, they will understand if what they're trying to do is collect, treat, recycle, or infiltrate water. So a lot of times what students do is they propose water gardens or wetlands or just different types of filtration systems. But once they know these elements and they use them together in a strategic way, then obviously can create a much complex system. So they can either collect the water, distribute the water, clean the water, infiltrate the water. So one of the questions is it possible to contribute to the well-being of people in the community through ecological projects? And I will show three projects that I've done. 2 are professional practice, and 1 is an academic project. This is a community gardens in Querétaro, and the different elements were trying to create community ties, create some food security, promote local economy, promote public spaces, and health within the community. This was a grant that I received a few years ago. So something that I started looking was at the Oxxos. These are convenience stores all over Mexico. There are more than 12,000 convenience stores, and it's really interesting because they have like junk food. So I started looking at the top 10 most sellers, and probably the most healthy item they sell is coffee, and possibly second one is beer. But basically what they sell is food. And this is a real problem because Mexico has the first place in child obesity and second place for adult obesity. But whenever we say it's like, okay, well, let's eat fresh food instead of going to the convenience store, but where those food come from? And food has a large ecological print. Food can travel up to 2,000 kilometers. So I started mapping where food was coming from. So, you know, I bought kiwis, and I had 2 options. Kiwis came from Chile or from New Zealand. So obviously they travel more than 2,000 kilometers. And then started mapping vulnerable neighborhoods in Querétaro to see where these community gardens could happen. And then I started analyzing, mapping, and talking to people. And then I ended up selecting 2 areas. One is called Bolaños, and the other one is called Tlacote. And then I did surveys, talked to people about these community gardens, and people were very interested. Some of them already had some gardening in their backyards, but the idea was to have a community garden. So I did all this analysis about just trying to design the best possible solution. And then some of the areas that I selected were abandoned plazas that had some sports infrastructure. So these community gardens, in a way, could reactivate a part of these neighborhoods. Besides food, thinking about medicinal species was very important, because in Mexico we have a long tradition of herbolaria. And obviously thinking about the different types of food and rotation, and it was very, very important. And obviously thinking about, in a more systemic way, of how these natural pest control and pollinating insects were part of the system. A lot of times people say, like, well, I don't like spiders, but they're an amazing pest control instead of using chemicals or pesticides. So this was one of the projects. The second project, it was done with a student of mine in Tilaco. Some of the elements that we were like thinking were the environmental restoration, job creation, the pursuit of vernacular architecture, creating rural tourism, and the creation of public spaces. So we worked for a year with Carlos Cobreros. We went to Tilaco in la Sierra Gorda de Querétaro. So we had our thesis students going to this place, and during this thesis project, we worked in this village of 400 people, and some of the information that the community gave us during these workshops, they mentioned that there was a lack of recreational spaces, there was the loss of vernacular architecture, and the loss of local vegetation, because a lot of the architecture was done with local materials. So previously, during the thesis studio, there were these design build projects that were done with the community. But a semester after this, one of the students who was in my thesis studio and then also in my landscape architecture course, we started looking into a lot of the information that was left behind. And then we were considering, as a part of the landscape course, to develop a sustainable forest almost as a repair shop in order to recover traditional trees used for construction purposes. For instance, palm trees that were used for palm roofs and wood construction. So the idea, it was to create a sustainable forest that could create jobs, maintain the land, create recreational spaces, and strengthen the identity of the village. So we were thinking about the different types of trees that we wanted to reintroduce into the site, and obviously think about the cycle of plantation, harvesting, and recultivation. And there were, so we designed this path so people could go there, not only as almost like a recreational or public space, but also as spaces that people could maintain. So it was really interesting to think about how creating these jobs and sustaining this forest could, like, in a way, create some spaces and also improve the local environment. And we decided not to only plant trees, but also to restore the local ecology. This eventually became a paper that we published in Valencia, in Spain. So it was really exciting to see how this academic project eventually became an academic paper. The last project that I want to mention, it was competition for the zoo in Morelia, Michoacán. So we work with different people from Morelia, Querétaro, and Celaya. This zoo is probably like 40 years old, and we were thinking about like different elements and how these elements were part of a bigger system. So whenever we look at the brief, for them, it was very important to create these like urban connections, and then maybe restore like a multi-purpose room where like conferences used to happen. It used to be in the zoo, but once the zoo was established, then this multi-purpose house was taken out. And then we look at the local, the surroundings, because the zoo is like in the middle of the city, but it's in a floodable area. So we're thinking how water, it was almost an excuse to prevent flooding in the streets, but almost capture or collect the water into the zoo. So we're thinking about like different strategies, like the economical, the urban, the social, and the environmental components. So for instance, in the streets, we want to take down some barriers and then create this visual transparency, and then create this urban connectivity, and use bioswales to collect the water from the street and bring it into the zoo. So whenever I talked earlier about soil, vegetation, and water, like here you can see how these components or these elements become part of a system. In a way, we're also thinking of obviously nature-based solutions, but combining sometimes gray infrastructure with like blue-green infrastructure. So these are actually some of the renderings that we prepared for the competition. And some of the other strategies was the substitution of eucalyptus trees, because these trees are from Australia and they're like really, really big, but they don't really provide ecosystemic services. I mean, obviously they do provide shade and some benefits, but it's a tree that is not part of the region. And it's so fragile that it can damage or create some accidents. So the idea is that we will substitute these trees over time. And then the idea was to improve the wetlands. There is a body of water, but the water is very still, so we wanted to clean the water through vegetation. One of the economical and environmental strategies, it was to create this zip line and view tower. The zoo receives subsidies from the state government and the federal government, but people have to pay like a $4 fee, but that's not enough to maintain such a large park. So the idea of creating these view towers, it kind of had like different ideas behind. One is that it could be a view tower, so people could go up there, but at the same time, we could collect water and storage the water. And at the same time, it can become a very cold garden that could improve or create this pollinator gardens and attract butterflies. The monarch butterflies goes into this area. And the zip line, it could be an extra income to the zoo. So the ideas behind these projects always try to think of like different elements to become part of a system. And finally, the historic component or element, it was to bring back this glass house, that it could become part of a multi-purpose room, and then the zoo could rent these spaces for like lectures, conferences, graduation events, and things like that. So to conclude, to me, it's very important the systemic approach, and in a context of a scarcity, a few actions can have multiple benefits. Contributing to biodiversity can improve human prosperity and well-being. And thinking in terms of rural and urban is a way of considering these settings as elements and not as systems. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Rodrigo. It's very nice to hear you talking about all your great projects and also your philosophy behind it from a not only a systemic point of view, but also relating that back to the kind of context where people living in scarcity and vulnerable situations. So thank you very much for your contribution and your very interesting projects. I think it relates also back to what Nico was talking about. How do we connect systems to concrete elements and the scales in between? So it's a very interesting combination of viewpoints. And you, in a way, you connect also Isra and Liad's work, so to connect it with the community and how the community can benefit from changes in their environment. So it seems like almost you conclude and you summarized the entire webinar. So thank you so much. I might have a question for. We don't have a lot of time left, so we probably need to end very quickly. But I wanted to ask you, all four of you, one question, and that is, in different stories, in all of your stories, you kind of shift from more technical orientation to a people-oriented or emotional type of view. That is not an easy one, because in practice, people will also always ask you for data, technical information, and all that kind of stuff. So how do you see that transition, and that how can we make it easier or more acceptable to have a more soft approach in cities and also rural environments? Who wants to comment on that first? Or is difficult question?
I could go first. I could give it a go. So it's so hard. That's my direct answer. So that's the shortest answer. It's hard to convince municipalities and decision makers, let's say, be very specific. In our case in Milan, the execution, let's say we have the Office of the Execution of the Greening that is related to the Directorate of Urban Planning, that was not convinced with the process of bringing people on board of the process, and why do we need to ask them what do they think about this park? It's a community park, so it's in a also very interesting part of the dynamics related to this neighborhood. What can we change? We need to raise more awareness. We need to be less technical, if we can do that. We need to bring expertise such as facilitation experts, co-creation experts on the process, that designing for people, designing nature-based solutions, or designing natural spaces for people, public spaces for people, need to include everyone. We cannot leave anyone behind for this process, during this process. And part of that was also because the funds of the European Commission for as a Horizon 2020 project was destinated for doing this as a part of the process. So part of the funding mechanism was directed for the co-creation process, and we cannot negotiate how can this not help within. My longest answer then is like bring everyone on board, try to facilitate things to make it work for everyone. One of the question that I had in chat was looking at the cooperation agreement that I mentioned. Actually, it is what part of the process of how to make it work. It's the nature-based solutions are not magical solutions. They are not as well as a Passepartout. They don't work for everywhere. They need to be tailored. They need to be locally tailored, and looking at the process from very, very social and demographic point of view, and looking at how this participation could work. So what we did we did this collaboration or cooperation agreements that the municipality initiated the process. We had different associations, what we call neighborhood associations, to be part of this cooperation agreement, and to have the responsibility shared within the community to take care of the space, to maintain the space. Every once in a while they go to the park and they do all the gardening activities and so on. So it's important that you have this process initiated with the people from the beginning of the co-creation. You want to increase their sense of belonging to the process that you're doing. So it's not just another green roof or green wall within the city. It's a green roof or a green wall that they are part of its inception, ideation, implementation, and so on, and maintenance till the end of the process. So that's my take on how do we do that. The part of the social participation, we had different instruments. So in Milan, we use the co-design by immersion, which is a technique, but there's been a lot of other techniques used in our partner cities. In Hamburg, they did a social added value canvas. In London as well, they had what they call the Nature Forum. So there's a lot of other possibilities of these social techniques to bring in everyone to the co-creation process. But it needs as well the willingness. So not just the financial part, the governance mechanism, but you need the willingness to participate. You need the citizens to have their, let's say, engagement readiness. They need to be part of the process. They need to also be on board of this as part of their belonging to the neighborhood. So it's not just one part of the story, but it's a whole complete story that you need to tell.
Thank you, Isra. Thank you so much. I think you covered a whole lot. I don't know if any others want to add to this, because it looks very comprehensive, your answer to this question. Maybe Liat, you want to, or Nico?
Only if we have time. The only thing I just to build on what Isra was saying, I agree with everything. And one thing that I'm finding is our tendency to compartmentalize culture under the humanities and environment or nature-based solution and so on under the natural sciences. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of hurdles is to really think about the fact that if we can really think about a kind of an environmental humanities as sort of like this bridge between not dividing these two or thinking about any sort of cultural work as falling under social sciences and humanities, and then and then the other is the kind of the quantitative metrics and so on and so forth. I think that if there is a push, that's what I would say we need to think about in terms of a disciplinary push. And I agree with Isra about bringing partners together, I think, is the most effective, because at the minute that you're bringing offices, programs, sectors that never even meet with one another, and you are putting them all at the same table, I think people really are immediately engaged, because oftentimes they tend to be an invisible voice in another kind of conversation. And the minute that they're brought into the conversation, they're immediately open-minded. We are assuming that they're going to be resistant, but people are actually quite open-minded when they are engaged in ways that they haven't been before. So those are the two things I just wanted to add, and maybe like just to bring back what Nico was saying, his last couple of slides about the fact that I've heard this from conservation authorities. People are saying that citizens are not engaged by stormwater metrics and by metrics on habitat and so on and so forth. They want a quality of life, right? That's what you motivate. And conservation authorities and so on recognize that if they want to engage a neighborhood, a city, and citizens, the way to do so is through a conversation. What does it contribute to their quality of life? And not just these kinds of numbers around, stormwater retention and so on. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Liat. Thank you so much. Rodrigo or Nico, do you want to have a last go at this question or the discussion that we have?
Maybe just because a lot of it has been said, but the thing is that let's say the softer approach, let's say the green approach, compared to the hardcore civil engineering and stuff like that. So I think there's more and more data coming in about what green means in health. If we make a lunch walk, if we all these kind of things, then we have 1.6 days per year less illness per employee and stuff like that. You can quantify that and also put in numbers of how much money is involved. So more and more data are coming to us, to make a case to say, look, if you invest in green, you know, you can spare 300,000 euros per year on this and this and this. And I think next to what has been said, we could make use of that as well. So that adds another chip on the table, basically.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you. And Rodrigo, you have a couple of last thoughts, I guess.
Well, I think they say amazing things, and I agree with them. I think maybe because, you know, like my education was in the US, and then I lived in Europe, and then coming back to Mexico, it was very drastic to see these changes. And I think seeing or living or experiencing the global South, it makes me more aware of like how actions have to have like multiple benefits. And I think whenever we talk about these social benefits, like I mean, what's the point of making a park that is beautiful, but people won't use it? So to me, it's something that I struggle with, and then I try to do in my practice and in my teachings. So I love Leah's comments and Isra's and Nico's, and thanks so much. Very, very inspiring.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much to all four of you. I think it was fantastic presentations and discussions and the things that you brought forward. And they pretty well aligned with each other. And that's I think it's great to see. So Leah and Isra, Rodrigo and Nico, thank you so much for contributing to this webinar. I loved it. Which leads me to tell the audience that we go into a little winter sleep as Ecology used to do. Maybe not so much in the city, but outside the city they still do. The urban dialogues will be back in February. So keep an eye out for any messages and posts that when we will do the next one and on what topic. I hope you enjoyed it today and all the other ones we did this year. And I wish you all a very good holiday period during the winter time. See you next time. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.